I've actually found it really hard to make a video on this topic, guys, because it has been so frustrating what has been going on. The Trump administration has been feuding with EU leaders and it has been crazy. Let's go through the highlights of the last few days. We had Vance saying to Zelensky to take a peace deal because they're forcing conscripts to the front line, which Zelensky dismissed.
You have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Did you say what problems we have?
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens.
Notice, though, that he didn't outright deny it, because it's true. The Ukrainian army is actually dragging people off of the streets while they're walking their dogs or while they're just minding their own business. They cannot get Ukrainians to sign up for the war. They don't want to go. They want peace. And it's a lot more complicated in Ukraine than the media tries to make out. It's super easy for some people to shout support for Ukraine, turning down a peace deal with America, especially when those people are miles away and not having to fight. But a ceasefire needs to happen as soon as possible. And you may not know a lot about this because Ukrainians don't have a voice right now. The elections got cancelled by Zelensky last year, so they don't have the opportunity to vote on any of this. And this person's comment really stood out to me. So they said, why can't we have Zelensky as our president? Would be so much better off than the big brown turd we have now. How lovely. This good versus evil, angel versus devil kind of thinking is so bad for everybody. I would just urge people to do some good research into both sides before you form opinions on these things. And I suggest putting yourself in this man's shoes, because in Europe and the UK, this could be one of us if the war doesn't stop. Keir Starmer has already suggested starting a conscription programme in the UK, and he made it a pledge to give £3 billion a year to Ukraine until at least 2031. And that decision did receive a lot of backlash in the UK because he did this around the same time that he was also cutting funding for elderly and disabled pensioners' winter fuel allowance, because apparently the UK had no money to fund it.
Why are you targeting the elderly to save money?
We have found a £22 billion black hole in the economy, and we've got to fix it. What we're not going to do is pretend it isn't there.
Cut to Starmer suddenly finding the money to send to foreign countries at war. And I wish I could use the excuse of ignorance, but I can't, because Starmer knows the effect this has on the elderly.
Winter before last, in the height of the energy prices going up, and spoke to an 84-year-old woman, worked all her life, obviously now a pensioner, and she told me that she doesn't get out of bed till midday because she didn't want to turn the heating on.
Yeah, it's awful.
And then when she did get out of bed, she had this sort of thermal jacket that she just wore all day long, so she didn't have to put the heating up very high. That's an awful position to put a pensioner in.
Yeah.
And there are just too many of those stories. Another pensioner, it was actually, we had a group of them in Dewsbury, was describing to me going around the supermarket and picking something up and looking at the price and then putting it back on the shelf.
Yeah.
And now you could say, well, Keir, that's not the biggest thing in the world.
Well, it is,
but actually it is, when you
Yeah.
just feel, after having worked all your life, I can't just have, lead the life I want to lead now. Or I can't do things I even did a year ago. That's the sense of insecurity, I think, that eats away at people.
It's awful. Another highlight of this week was Vance calling out Starmer on free speech censorship in the UK.
We do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Actually, you know what? I agree with him. You can be proud of the UK's history of free speech. Key word being history. Present day, not so much. But yeah, I guess you can ride into that 1984 sunset, clasping onto that pride you have of the UK's history of free speech that they had in the past, yeah. And now there's actually leaked audio that reveals that Trump confronted Starmer in private about the UK, the British government, requesting to access Apple users' data.
He runs a nation now that is, removing the security elements on Apple phones so that they can,
we told them you can't do that.
Yeah, Tulsi, I saw.
We actually told them.
Yes.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's something, that you hear about with China.
They put people in jail in Britain for praying in their own homes and silently.
But you were having that with Biden too, if you think. It's not Biden. It was the people that surrounded this stuff.
Does anybody know, when did dystopian novels become real life? Like, was there a specific moment, a specific year? When did this creep up on us? After the Zelensky fight, Marco Rubio went on the news and explained why their frustration has been building with him over the last couple of weeks.
You guys only saw the end. You saw what happened today. You don't see all the things that led up to this. The president's been very clear. He campaigned on this. He thinks this war should have never started. He believes, and I agree, that had he been president, it never would have happened. Now here we are. He's trying to bring an end to this conflict. We've explained very clearly what our plan is here, which is we want to get the Russians to a negotiating table. We want to explore whether peace is possible. They understand this. They also understand that this agreement that was supposed to be signed today was supposed to be an agreement that binds America economically to Ukraine, which to me, as I've explained, and I think the president alluded to today, is a security guarantee in its own way, because we're involved. It's now us. It's our interests. That was all explained. That was all understood. And nonetheless, for the last 10 days, in every engagement we've had with the Ukrainians, there's been complications in getting that point across, including the public statements that President Zelensky has made. But they insisted on coming to D.C. This agreement could have been signed 5 days ago, but they insisted on coming to Washington. And there was should have been a very clear understanding. Don't come here and create a such scenario where you're going to start lecturing us about how diplomacy isn't going to work. President Zelensky took it in that direction, and it ended in a predictable outcome as a result.
They are so focused on peace and ceasefire and an end to deaths and human suffering. I'm not hearing that anywhere else. And around the same time that Marco Rubio was doing this interview, there were floods of people apparently coming into London and Dublin and Washington, waving their Ukrainian flags, showing their support. It's good to see so many people there, because Zelensky is in desperate need for troops. Since they're so supportive, I'm sure they'd be willing to go and fight on the front lines, along with Starmer and Macron and all of those EU leaders who were sending out their word for word identical messages of support online. I did get a very heartfelt, authentic vibe off those posts that were pasted in like a template. Even if these EU leaders' intentions are good and not fueled by a want for profit or control, well then their intentions are misguided. They aren't giving us any indication of an end goal, a point where this war ends and how it ends. The only thing they seem to be marching us towards is World War III right now.
You're
playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm
with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
And sorry, but even if you hate Trump or you just love Zelensky, you have to admit that his body language from the get-go was not exactly of someone who's excited to sign a peace deal or someone who is grateful for the aid that they're receiving from a foreign country. Now, Zelensky repeatedly said in this meeting that he wants security assurances before he'd agree to a deal. And I understand wanting security assurances, but I don't know, he didn't seem to understand the part where America would literally have men on the ground in Ukraine. They would have a financial vested interest in Ukraine, therefore a financial vested interest in protecting Ukraine. And Europe had already offered security to Ukraine too. So Ukraine would be wrapped in a bag of cotton balls, basically. So I would rather hear him just talking about moving forward with the peace deal rather than getting hung up on all the minor details and hung up on how much he hates Putin, and keep your focus on just ending this. And I'm sorry, but what was he doing trying to suggest that Russia will attack America?
You have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future.
Like, just think about the reality of what he's saying when he fearmongers like that. He's saying that even though Russia hasn't been able to make headway in Ukraine for 3 years of fighting and death, that once a peace deal is signed, it'll just be different. Suddenly, Russia is just going to sweep through Europe and America out of nowhere, even though that's based on literally nothing. Zelensky also said that Russia will go for Poland, which that makes perfect sense, right? Like, I'm sure Russia is just giddy with excitement to step into NATO protected territory. That would be so beneficial for Putin to do that. So beneficial for Russia. I mean, there's just so much incentive for him to do it. It makes total sense. He just feels like it. It doesn't matter if NATO is going to pile in on top of him. He's going to do it anyway. And it's just the biggest, greatest threat to the world. Luckily, I'm not alone. There's this one other guy in the UK who appeared on the BBC speaking some sense.
A lot of people who like to start wars are suddenly very angry with one guy who wants to stop this war. There are people who have taken us into one disaster after another, war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, spent much of today on social media attacking Trump. What we're seeing, I think, is a reset of geopolitics, a breakdown of what you might call the international liberal world order. 20, 30 years of one foreign policy disaster after another. They've had enough of that constant interventionism. They've had enough of Europe not paying its way. Germany under the Greens, absolutely bonkers, becoming more dependent upon Russia, upon China, and then turning around and criticising Donald Trump when he says we've got to end this war. It doesn't make sense anymore. Ukraine obviously needs to be involved in the negotiated settlement. Europe is going to have to pay to defend itself. Because understandably they're saying, look, we've got China. We've got our problems on the border. So I think for everybody who sat there criticising Donald Trump, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and think, actually, are we getting this right here in Europe?
And to the point that a number...
So here's what I'm going to say, because I just feel like I'm living in La La Land at the moment. War is not black and white. This is not a situation where you can say that Zelensky is an angel and Putin is just the devil incarnated. Life doesn't work like that. War isn't that simple. There's history between these countries that you may not know. There are different parts that have been moving over decades that you may not know about. So if I can leave this video on any note, I would just say, read up on Ukrainian history, read up on Russian history. If you're lazy, then ask an AI bot to give you both sides of the story on this war before you decide that you think is a good idea to shut down a peace deal with America, because this war needs to end now. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really hope that I'm going to be able to hear different people's perspectives, whether they're in America or Europe or the UK, whether they're in Russia or Ukraine. It's super important to hear different perspectives on this and broaden our minds a little bit. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time.